Celtic Frost, the architects of the avant-garde in heavy metal. Celtic Frost never followed. They led, even if no one was ready for where they were going. Formed in Switzerland in 1984 by Tom G. Warrior and Martin Ian after the dissolution of their earlier band Hellhammer, Celtic Frost quickly became one of the most daring and unpredictable forces in extreme metal. Their influence spans black metal, death metal, doom, avant-garde, even goth and industrial. They didn't just break the rules, they completely ignored them. Their early work, particularly Morbid Tales, released in '84, and To Megatherion in '85, laid down the foundation for what would become death and black metal. Primitive, haunting, and crushing, these records combine thrash aggression with a darker, more ritualistic energy. Tracks like Into the Crypt of Rays and Circle of the Tyrants weren't just songs, they were statements of intent. Celtic Frost didn't just want to be heavy, they wanted to be different. But what really set the band apart was their fearless experimentation. On To Megatherion, they brought in operatic female vocals, orchestral elements, and abstract art by H.R. Geiger. In 1987, Into the Pandemonium, a record that pushed things even further. It featured industrial beats, classical interludes, and even a cover of a synth pop song by Walla Voodoo called Mexican Radio. It confused many fans, but would later be seen as visionary. Where others stuck to the genre, Celtic Frost treated metal like an art form without borders. Then came the infamous Stumble, 1988's Cold Lake, the band's flirtation with glam metal, complete with teased hair and sleazy riffs, was widely panned and nearly destroyed their legacy, but to their credit, Celtic Frost didn't try to defend it. After one more release, in Vanity Nemesis, with the return of Martin Ian to the fold, which was a slight step back towards where they should be, they eventually retreated, reassessed, and dissolved. Years later, in 2006, they returned with Monotheist, a crushing, pitch-black slab of doom and despair. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a resurrection. Dark and slow, emotionally heavy, Monotheist showed that Celtic Frost had lost none of their intensity or vision. Songs like A Dying God Coming into Human Flesh and Progeny proved they were still ahead of their time even 2 decades later. What makes Celtic Frost important isn't just their music, it's their mindset. They saw metal as a canvas and not a cage. They challenged their audience and took risk and refused to settle. Bands like Opeth, Triptychon, which is Tom Warrior's post-Celtic Frost band, Mayhem, even Nirvana, all felt that ripple. Whether through innovation, failure, or defiance, Celtic Frost always moved forward. Discussing 2006's Monotheist, which is my favorite release of the Celtic Frost releases. See, after nearly 2 decades of silence, Monotheist arrived like a black monolith dropped onto the metal landscape. It just came out of nowhere, unexpected, and my God, what a welcome return. Because the legendary innovators were back, and they weren't to relive old glories, really was a reinvention. Monotheist is not just a comeback album, it was like a phoenix rising from the ashes, a true rebirth, heavy, bleak, suffocating, and absolutely uncompromising. From the opening moments of Progeny, it's clear that this is not Celtic Frost of Morbid Tales or Into the Pandemonium. The tempos were slower, the atmosphere thicker, the sound more punishing. Tom G. Warrior's trademark grunt is still here, but is buried under layers of apocalyptic doom riffs, crushing productions, and existential dread. The standout track, at least for me, A Dying God Coming into Human Flesh, is the heart of the album. It moves with funeral pace, dragging the listener through grief and decay. Martin Ian's vocals are half whispered, half muttered, like someone narrating the end of everything, and then Tom Warrior's vocals come in this guttural rage, evoking the darkness that's being warned by Ian. It's not metal for adrenaline, it's metal for staring into the void. Production-wise, the album is flawless. It's dense but clear, raw but refined. Guitars are tuned low and played like they're carrying weight. The drums hit like war hammers, and the addition of female vocals and ambient textures, particularly on Os Abysma Vel Doth and Triptych, a ghostly, unsettling tone. Lyrically, Monotheist deals in nihilism, death, and theology, along with internal decay. There's no hope here. It's complete dire and no pretense. It's less about Satan and more about the absence of God. It doesn't yell in your face. It really smothers you in despair. The influence of doom, goth, and industrial is strong, but Monotheist doesn't sound like it's borrowing from those genres. It sounds like it's dragging them down into Frost's own abyss. It's slow and deliberate, designed not to entertain, but to haunt. This is not an album for casual listeners. It's long and it's heavy, emotionally demanding. But for those who sit with it, it's one of the most powerful statements ever made in extreme metal by one of its founding fathers. With Monotheist arguably being Celtic Frost's darkest and most personal record and my personal favorite, it's less concerned with traditional metal tropes like rebellion or occult imagery, and more with spiritual collapse and existential despair and honestly just the decay of humanity. Here's what's running through it. In the absence of God, the title itself, Monotheist, is almost ironic. The album isn't about belief, but the vacuum left by disbelief. Songs like A Dying God Coming Into You of My Flesh doesn't rage against divinity, they mourn its absence. There's a constant tension between spiritual yearning and spiritual emptiness. It's more theological, honestly, than satanic. And then we go into death and decay. And it's not just a theme here, it's a mood. It's not just physical death, but emotional, cultural. It's more disintegration. The music is slow, almost decaying in real time. With tracks like Obscured and Elohim, it feels like funeral rites for the self. Talking about inner suffering is where early Celtic Frost had aggression and attitude. Monotheist is more internalized and claustrophobic. It's hollow and depressive. I mean, Tom Warrior's lyrics often sound like personal confessions cloaked in mythic imagery, in just dire language. There really is no victory here. It's like he's slowly unraveling into finality. And even structurally, Monotheist feels like an ending. The long closer triptych is divided into 3 parts, ending in ghostly minimalism. It feels like it's a final track, and it feels like when it descends into silence, unbeknownst to them and us, it was the last we would hear from Celtic Frost. Then, of course, after Celtic Frost split in 2008, due to irreconcilable tensions between Tom Warrior and Martin Ian again, well, Tom Warrior formed Triptykon, and it wasn't to start over, it really continues the path began with Monotheist. I mean, if you're not familiar, the stumbling block spoke about before with Cold Lake, it was the only album not to feature Martin Ian. In the follow-up album, Vanity Nemesis, Ian came back, and it's really what Cold Lake would have been if Ian would have been there to reel Tom Warrior in. But everyone realized that was a stumbling block, and that's how we've got the genius that was Monotheist, and now Warrior continuing on with what we are blessed with when it comes to Triptykon. Because Triptykon connects and evolves around that sort of same idea, that continuation of what Celtic Frost left off with Monotheist. It's, if you listen to their first album from 2010, I can never say this right, Eparstera Daminos or something like that, it picks up exactly where Monotheist left off. It's the same crushing doom, same layered despair, but really even more refined. And Tom Warrior took the aesthetic he built with Monotheist and really expanded on it. So it's more textured, more dynamic, and it's even really more oppressive. It continues that kind of despairing emotion that we were left with on Monotheist, this kind of scream turned inward. And Triptykon is the slow echo of that scream in a void. Tom Warrior has said Triptykon gave him creative freedom without compromise. So in many ways, Monotheist Unchained. And depending on your perspective, that's either a good or bad thing. And while Celtic Frost was still linked to their early kind of thrash metal, black metal roots, Triptykon is purely doom. It's purely gothic, but still with that statement of avant-garde. Songs stretch past 10 minutes, vocals are lower, arrangements are more cinematic, but the spiritual and emotional DNA left over from Monotheist is still there. So like I said before, Monotheist was the funeral pyre for Celtic Frost, and what rose from it was Triptychon. It wasn't simply a rebirth, it was like the shadow became Triptychon. I mean, if you see Monotheist as Celtic Frost's final word, then Triptychon is the long echoing aftermath. And that aftermath, to this day, still speaks volumes. Thanks for joining me in this talk about Celtic Frost and Triptychon, Tom Warrior, and of course Martin Ian. Rest in peace. See you in the next video.